Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we're here for my LPL Week 6 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. The LPL, a little bit of a different week this week. We have one less day to cover, so instead of all 7 days, they're actually skipping out on Thursday. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but I don't remember what it is, so let me know that down in the comments section below. But let's not waste too much time. The LPL video is always very long. I've been trying to get through them in a little bit better time as of recently, as I'm sure you guys have been able to notice, but to do that, we have to make these intros a little bit shorter. So, I'll just say all my intro stuff. If you are new here, what we're going to be doing is going through all 6 days of LPL action here in Week 6, going over who won, how they won, my player of the series, my dud of the series, where I think teams are headed in both directions, and then at the end, I will be giving you my updated power rankings as well as my player of the week and my dud of the week. Of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of the week here in the LPL. What teams impressed you? What teams did not? And how is your favorite team doing? I love to hear from you guys down in the comment section below. But with all that being said, it's time to jump into the analysis. So, of course, kicking us off, it's going to be day number 1. And we kick day number 1 off with a really interesting matchup between Ninjas in Pyjamas and ThunderTalk Gaming. And TT picks up another win here. They are on a huge win streak. I mean, it's technically not a streak, I guess you could say, because they lost at the end of last week, but they've still been incredibly hot, starting 0-2 and now sitting at 5-3 is a really good record. 5-1 in their last 6 is really, really good for ThunderTalk, and they continue it here against a Ninjas in Pyjamas team that at least on paper looks like they should be pretty good, but this was a series that TT definitely controlled. You could see that in the game time between both, a 29-minute game, 24-minute game. ThunderTalk definitely dominated both and looked really, really good doing it. Game number 1 was entirely destroyed on the top side. Invincible had a horrendous game on the Aurelia. Hoya took advantage on the Scion, was able to generate a ton of gold. Beishwan got strong. Yucal got strong on the Akali. Even Huanfeng was doing damage on this Varus, and you were really sitting in a position by like 10 minutes in the game where you're like, well, it feels like it's over. And Game 2 certainly wasn't much better for NIP, as you had Yucal just utterly dominating on this Tristana. Blind pick Yone for Dream into nothing. I mean, well, I don't understand what the goal for this was, but really good game and good series coming out from Yucal. We always talk about the winners first, so let's talk about TT here. Let's talk about Yucal, who's going to get player of the series. He's been awesome this year, like genuinely one of the best mid laners in the entire LPL. Kind of awesome, and that's surprising to me. I know Yucal was getting better and getting more adjusted the longer the year went on last year in summer, but I did not expect him to come out and really be a driving force for this ThunderTalk team through the beginning part of the season. Obviously, Huanfeng and Yao Yao was kind of the lane that I was looking at in terms of ThunderTalk and being like, this is going to carry them to playoffs and to a really good record if they do end up making it. But Yucal being the one to step up and really be the focal point of the team, I think is a really positive sign overall. We know Huanfeng and Yao Yao are solid players. They played well in this series, but Yucal has been on a completely different level on carry-oriented pieces. The Akali game in Game 1 did a really good job winning early against the Sylas and then being able to get out on the map. Of course, top lane became a complete hellscape for NIP in that game number 1, and Yucal definitely capitalized on that, but the Elise wasn't able to generate any sort of early leads, and we know the Akali can blow up the Elise as well, so a lot of good targets, I would say, and Yucal, I think, played that game really well. And then Game 2, I mean, it was just Tristana from moment 1. A lot of attention shown mid lane for Yucal, and he was able to distribute that everywhere on the map. This is what a Tristana mid can really do. We've really seen this pick rise in popularity over the course of the last couple of patches, and it's really become a mainstay in the mid lane. You cannot pick these, very volatile melee mids into, or blind anymore, because Tristana is just going to be an option to come out and just obliterate them in lane like Yucal did in this game number 2. Really, really solid showing from him. Gotta give a lot of credit to Beishwan as well, who I thought jungled really well in this series. It doesn't seem like Xiao Huangren is actually going to be playing here. I'm not exactly sure if they brought him up just to practice with the main squad, but he was signed officially up to ThunderTalk, and a lot of people assumed that as the big jungle prodigy that he is, he was going to come in and immediately play, but Beishwan has continued to play as this team has continued to win, and Beishwan continues to look pretty good. I like Beishwan a lot as a player. I think he's someone who is almost underrated in terms of community outlook at this point, and I think he is a genuinely solid jungler at this level, and he has been for quite a long time. Remember, he was pretty good last year, and I know he didn't have the best start to the season, but he's really rebounded as the rest of ThunderTalk has rebounded. And then the other player that you really got to shout out is, of course, Hoya in the top lane, who just obliterated Invincible. Not a good game in game number 1, really series. I mean, because game number 2 wasn't much better, but not a good series from the top side of NIP. That's Invincible and Xiao Bao, and Hoya did a good job taking advantage of that. Even if I think Beixuan was a little bit more of the aggressor in that lane, Hoya definitely actively took advantage of the mistakes that Invincible was making. Aurelia into Sion is a boring lane, which is not what Aurelia wants. Sion's just going to farm up and outscale and eventually be stronger, and that was definitely to the detriment of NIP. So the top side of the map really coming through for ThunderTalk. Bot side also, playing relatively well. I would say not nearly as dominant, but I would also argue that that's probably the strong side for NIP. So ThunderTalk looking good. Nip not looking good. I really have nothing else to say. Their solo laners have not been particularly good recently. I still like Invincible as a player, and I think he's generally been this team's second best player over the course of the year, but this series was atrocious, and he is easily going to get done to the series for it. Game 1 was a disaster. You can't even comprehend how bad it could possibly have been. And then game 2 wasn't good either, even though everybody on the team lost. And so, yeah, Invincible definitely deserves done of the series. He simply has to be better. Obviously, Rich waiting in the wings. This kind of performance only adds fuel to the fire of all the people in the comment section screaming for Rich to come in. Again, I can't reiterate enough. The idea that Rich is some sort of top 3 or 4 top laner in the LPL is just not the case. I understand that he might be a little bit more consistent than Invincible, but I see a lot of talk about Rich as if he's immediately going to come in and this NIP team is immediately going to be able to win. I obviously don't think that's the case, but if Invincible is going to play like this, maybe getting him in and giving him an opportunity to at least show that he can be relatively stable, unlike Invincible, is an option. But he's certainly not the only player on this team playing bad. Everyone on the top side of NIP has been awful. Dream has been below replacement level. I almost gave him done of the series for that game number 2 on the Yone because it was abysmal. I see a ton of people being like, yay, Dream's back in. And yes, Dream played really well last year, and he's done okay in the LDL. He has been awful, and I mean genuinely awful. One of the worst mid laners in the LPL so far in 2023. I can't remember him winning a laning phase. He has legitimately just not been able to play at this level, and that continued in this series in both games. And then Xiao Bao just cannot play. He's way too aggro to have 2 losing solo laners, and he really has no jungle pressure going into a good jungler like Beixuan. This top side just got immediately destroyed, and Xiao Bao had nothing else to do on the map, and instead of playing safe, he ended up playing way too aggro. He ended up dying way too much, especially on that Elise, and it's really just, it's not a good look for NIP. This team is not very good. Fodic does look good in these laning phases. He's able to generate leads on his own, but again, Fodic's not the kind of player that's going to be able to win games for a team that is losing. He's not, one of the top 3 or 4 AD carries in the world. He's a good AD carry, a very good one, but not one of the best, and that means if the rest of the team is not working, he's probably going to lose, and that's what's happening here. Even if he is good in lane, he's not able to transition that into any sort of wins, and so Ninjas and Pyjamas in general, just not very good. I dropped them out of the playoffs last week, and they might fall even lower this week because this was a horrible loss to a middle-tier team, not even one of the best teams in the league, and so definitely worried about NIP, but for ThunderTalk, really good win. You got to feel really good about how UCal is playing. If Wanfeng and Yao Yao can be those secondary carries, if that's what, that bot lane ends up becoming, your team is genuinely good. And this is a team that could push in for top 6, top 7 at the very best. I know a lot of people had them in that conversation in the preseason power rankings. It's really good to see them kind of fulfilling some of that destiny right now, getting on the same page, what with everybody kind of playing at the high level right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the jungle situation, but as ThunderTalk is moving along and getting hotter and continuing this momentum, you might not need a change in order for this team to be a genuinely relevant team come playoff time. Moving on now to our second series of day 1 here, and it's an interesting one. A bottom team, always at least a little bit interesting here in the LPL facing off against a mid-tier team, or at least what has performed like a mid-tier team up until this point. We had LGD Gaming taking on Royal Never Give Up. And RNG does pick up the 2-0 win, as they absolutely should here. If RNG were to have lost this series, that would have been pretty disastrous, but honestly, RNG really has been a ton better over the past few weeks. They started off super poorly, and they were really in a bad spot to start the year, but they've rebounded relatively well. We're moving into the second half of the split now, and honestly, RNG's looking genuinely scary, and this series kind of proves why. The bot lane was very on in this series. Gala and Ming have been really, really good for RNG, I would say, ever since Ming came back. Gala especially, I think, has just played well all year long, even when the rest of the team really has not been able to keep up with that kind of performance, but Ming in this particular series really was the standout player. Had a really good game on the Nami in game 1. I always talk about this, but Ming's contributions to the team are incredibly underrated in terms of what RNG is able to do. That was the case last year. That's been the case for like half a decade for Ming. It feels like he's been the best player on RNG for a very long time, and yet he's never really gotten the credit for being the best player on RNG. I think people are, waking up to that. I think obviously him not being there and Bunny being in the team and the team really struggling kind of highlighted Ming's importance a tad bit more. Him coming back in the team really getting a lot better, not as soon as he came back, but once he got integrated back into the team, I think definitely is a good sign. And then him really showing up and just being magnetic, especially with these Ash arrows in game 2, it just highlights how freaking good he is as a player. And it really just shows how important he is to RNG as a team. I know the big narrative surrounding Ming has always been engage player. He does not play anything else. He's not an enchanter player. He's never going to be able to play these marksman bot. Well, here's a great Nami game. Here's a great Ash game. Go do with it what you will. I've said multiple times on this channel, I hate the narrative around Ming that he can only play engagers, because I honestly just don't think that's right. Like, I don't think it's ever been right, if I'm being entirely honest. He's never really had bad performances on the enchanters. He's not had bad performances, on these more poke-oriented, in this case marksman, but poke-oriented style bot laner, support things, right? He's been good at these champions for a very long time, but you know who hasn't been good at playing around these champions? The rest of RNG. This team has always felt a lot more comfortable when they have engage coming out from their support, because Wei in particular isn't really great as an engage threat. That's not really how he likes to play a lot of the late game team fights. He is a damage oriented player and he likes to do that. Breathe doesn't really play engagers. He plays split pushers and he plays weak side tanks. He's not really someone who wants to play a primary engager. So you often look to see Ming on these champions where he can get out on the map, where he can make proactive plays, because that's what he does super well, is control the map. But that's not to take away from his ability to play in lane, just because he is very good at that play style, and I think we're really starting to see that. Obviously, Gala had a really good series as well. That Lucian game 1, he was doing so much damage. Obviously, he was still good on the Varus in game 2, but the Ashe really was the style points, I would say, coming out of that bot lane, coming out of game 2. Angel has really looked a lot better in the mid lane. He was really struggling to start the year, but it feels like ever since he full-time won that starting job in the mid lane, he's gotten a lot more comfortable. 2 very tassive mid laners here. The Talia we've seen a bit, not only from him, but from other players, but the Twisted Fate is just not coming out from basically anybody worldwide. It's really cool to see Angel kind of go to a comfort pocket pick that he has and be super successful on it. If you're going to be able to get out on the map and be able to affect other lanes, TF is still pretty good. He's just not going to be able to shove in the same way that he used to be able to, and then the damage in the late game really isn't all that good, but he can still roam. I mean, the ult is still really good, and the gold card is still really good. It's still basically point-and-click CC, so those bottom 3, I think, really stepped up. Breathe has been much better as a weak side top laner, someone who can just win the lane on his own 1v1 and not really worry too much. Xiaoshu did not have a particularly good series, especially in that game 2, and I think Breathe really did a good job taking advantage of him. Basically, everybody on RNG stepping up, and it's a good look. As for LGD on the other side, I actually think they were really bad in this series, and I didn't expect them to come out and beat RNG. I didn't expect them to come out and be super competitive and dominating some games, but I also didn't expect them to come out and be a complete wet noodle, which is what they were here. Top side of the map has been a major problem for this team the entire year. Xiaoshu and Meteor might just be the 2 worst players in their role in the LPL right now. I can't remember a good game that either of them has really had in 2023, which is super unfortunate. But this week, for me, Jin Zhao is going to get my dud of the series against RNG. That bot lane was definitely RNG favored, and a lot of that was just Jin Zhao playing way too far forward. First of all, pulling Yuumi out here, it's fine, whatever, 13.1, I can't talk about, this is still strong Yuumi, so you want to play it, you got to be able to survive early, you didn't, that's not entirely your fault. But game 2, he was magnetically attracted to those Ashe arrows. I mean, it just felt like he was hit by every single one as the Heimerdinger. Not only that, but the lane pressure that you're supposed to offer as Heimer is supposed to offset what the Ashe is able to do on the other side, and he just got pushed in over and over and over again, and so I'm like, what exactly is this champion for here? Jin Zhao, I thought, played this series pretty bad. Even if he's been kind of okay to start the year, I would say that Jin Zhao and Hai Chao have probably been the 2 most consistent players on LGD, at least to start 2023. This series was not it, and I still don't think Jin Zhao's all that good. Haichao was fine. He's by far the best player on LGD, and it just doesn't matter. This team, talent-wise, is bottom 1 in the league. Lucky for them, AL is just garbage, and so they, end up lower, but LGD is just not good, and I think that was proven again in this series. But outlook-wise, this team is bottom 2. Worst-case scenario, I think they're bottom 1. I don't think there's a scenario where I could ever think about putting them above that, unless something drastic changes. This top side is the worst in the league, and then, Jin Zhao, LPC. If Haichao's your best player, that's not a good sign, right? No other team has that problem, and so definitely worried about LGD, but we kind of knew that they were going to be bad going into the year. As for RNG, really feels like you've rebounded from a really rough start to the year. You've got your full lineup in. They've had some time to gel. They've had some time to scrim together. And now things are starting to come together. I don't exactly know where this team stands because they could be very good. They genuinely could be like a top 3 or 4 team if everything starts to click for RNG. They definitely didn't show that at the beginning of the year. But now you're on a pretty decent win streak. You're back to 500 as this roster. And everybody does seem to be clicking on a relatively good level. I would say they're probably somewhere between 4 and 7. Like somewhere in that range of good and trying to be great LPL teams, but good for RNG to bounce back here. I think the league is better when RNG is competitive, and that definitely seems to be the avenue we're heading towards right now. Moving on now to our second day of LPL action here in Week 6. And we kicked off day 2 with a little bit of an upset. I'm not sure if it's a big one, but definitely a small one, as we saw OMG taking on Ultra Prime. And Ultra Prime picking up the win. OMG not exactly been the team that I really wanted them to be jumping out at the beginning part of the season, but certainly not the worst start to the year that we've ever seen from a team, and so I'll cut them at least a little bit of slack. But Ultra Prime picking up their 3rd win of the year. It feels like this team is destined to win at least a few games off the back of Doggo just being a lot better than people gave him credit for last year. Now, I don't want it to get twisted. I don't think that Doggo was necessarily good last year for BLG. I see a lot of people defending him online because he's playing well in 2023, but I do think 2022 was a little bit of a down year for Doggo. Obviously came in with this ridiculous amount of hype, with this ridiculous amount of expectation. That was a team that really wanted to make Worlds, and they were bringing in a player who had never played at a major league level before, and so it was definitely a big call for them to give him that opportunity. He didn't necessarily live up to that in year 1, but now he's back on a team with much lower expectations, a team that is willing to build around him, quite frankly, and a team that is willing to play around him very consistently, and I do think that it is helping a lot with his development. This is so much closer to his year on Beyond Gaming than it is to his year on Bilibili here on Ultra Prime, and honestly, this is just what Ultra Prime does. Year after year, they seem to have an AD carry that's pretty good, and then they build around him, but they can't win because they don't have any other good players. They just have a really good ADC. Last year, it was Elk. I remember before they became Ultra Prime, it was Gala, and now it's Doggo, right? Like, you've got a ton of really good AD carries coming through this organization. Unfortunately, they're never going to be able to win because they're not surrounded with talent, but Doggo is able to do enough in this series to be able to pick it up. Really, really interesting choices coming out of him for the AD carry spot here. We're seeing the Xayah, we're seeing the Ezreal, we're seeing the Kai'Sa. Not particularly meta choices, but ones that are definitely comfort for Doggo and for a lot of LPL players, if I may add, and it definitely came into that here. I would say comfort is definitely a big win, generally speaking, especially when you're not facing the single best teams in the world, because they're comfortable on everything, and so you probably have to pick the stuff that's strong, but when you're going up against a team like OMG, play what you're good at, and you're probably going to be able to win. Doggo's been really good this year. He's player of the series. He carried this Ultra Prime team in both Game 1 and Game 3 to their victories. I think Game 3 MVP went to Baolan, and he was good on the Ashe, don't get me wrong, but this was Doggo's world. We were just living in it, and he really is Ultra Prime. When he wins, this team wins, and when he loses, this team is probably going to lose. Like I said, Baolan was also good, and I think Ning has kind of been on the upswing. He was really bad to start the year, like the first couple weeks of the season, but I think ever since Chinese New Year, we've come back. He's felt a little bit more comfortable. I think he's gotten a lot better on stage, and I think the last few performances have been relatively good. I still don't think he's like a top tier jungle in the league or anything like that, but I don't think he's someone who's actively going to be hurting the team quite like he was earlier on in the split. Now, that's not to say Ultra Prime still doesn't have their problems. Solo lanes are still a problem for this team. Shanchi was just better than Harry, and while Cream didn't have a very good series, Ching's not very good, right? Like that, I'm not going to expect him to just be able to turn around the form that he has been showing all year. There are still problems with Ultra Prime, but Doggo's really good. Balan and Ning are kind of slowly starting to get back into form, and this team might be a little bit more competitive than maybe we were giving them credit for. As for OMG on the other side, This is a sucky loss. You really did not want to lose this. And honestly, I'm starting to lose a little bit of faith in this team. This is a team I had a lot of high hopes for going into the year. It felt like another year of Shanji, Cream, and Abel being the core, and then adding on PP God, someone who has just made every player that he's ever played with better, with the one exception to that BLG season. I was really hoping that OMG was just going to take that leap and become a genuine top 5, top 6 team in the LPL this year, but it just doesn't seem to have happened. They're a good team. They're a team that can beat, a lot of the mid-tier teams. They beat ThunderTalk last week, which is a nice win, even in context, but looking at it now, like, losing to Ultra Prime, it's not very good, and you have at least one of these, like, a week. You get destroyed by somebody at least once per week, it seems, at the very least, and so I am getting a little bit concerned about OMG's chances, not only as a contender, but as a playoff team in general. Aki's going to get my dud of the series here. He just didn't really do anything on the Vi. I always talk about this with Vi. You have to be the better team in order to pull Vi off at a high level, and let me tell you, OMG was not the better team in this series. Doggo was the best player, and Aki never really had the opportunity to get on him and deal any damage in the late game, and then the Vi stuff happened. He got blown up in the late game just for trying to ult somebody, because Vi is super squishy when you're behind. I think Shanji played relatively well. I think Abel had some moments where he looked good in this series, but I think the rest of the team definitely disappointed, and that's not to say that those players didn't disappoint in their losses. I just think at least Shanji and Abel were good in their wins, but Aki, Cream, PP God, disappointing. I think Aki and Cream, generally speaking, have been disappointing over the course of 2023 so far. Hopefully they're able to turn it around. I still think Cream has the mechanical upside to be one of the best mid laners in the entire region, but there's a lot of mid laners like that right now. You got Strive on Rare Adam, you got Shanks on WE. It feels like they're all, in this little self-contained hole where it's like somebody's gonna break through and they've all shown flashes, but which one's it gonna be? Cream doesn't seem like he's close to the top right now, unfortunately, and that's unfortunate because I really do like him as a player, what we've seen from him in the past few years, but it just doesn't seem like it's happening. PP God has not had a particularly good year since coming over to OMG. I'm not going to say that his entire success revolves around the Victory 5 organization, but it's kind of funny how he's awesome in that org and in that team, and then as soon as he leaves, it's bad. It's happened twice now, but I don't know what to tell you. This OMG team isn't very good. I think jungle is a weakness for them. Hopefully they can figure it out. Macro has certainly been a problem. If they can figure out how to get that under control, I think they have the mechanical skill to beat just about anybody in the league, but they definitely need to work on their problems. As for Ultra Prime, big win here. I think you're setting yourself up to be a very competitive non-playoff team. That's what Ultra Prime probably is. There's a lot of really good teams, 13 to be precise in the LPL in my opinion. Ultra Prime still probably isn't cracking that top 13 even with this win, but they're getting closer and closer to being the team that is the closest on the outside of being there. And I think if everything goes right, if Doggo continues to just be awesome in the bot lane, perhaps they could contend for like a number 11 or 12 spot in the standings. I just think that's a little ambitious for how the rest of the team is playing at the moment, and there's still a lot of question marks, but the bot lane's been really good. The jungle's getting better. Those are good signs for an Ultra Prime team that I didn't have a lot of expectations for going into 2023. But moving on now to our second series of day number 2, and it's a good one. It's a good series that I was really interested in. We're finally starting to see a team here get tested. Well, both of them, I guess, in this case. We had Weibo Gaming taking on Invictus Gaming. I'm really intrigued to see what Invictus really is. They went on that giant hot streak towards the beginning of the year, but we can all kind of agree that they didn't go against necessarily the best competition. They were beating some lower teams. They still are good, but this is really where they're going to start getting tested, and Weibo is a hell of a test. This is maybe the most talented team in the world, just mechanically speaking, but the brain isn't always there, so it's really good to see Weibo come out and get a nice 2-0, genuinely clean victory. Like, not, oh, it was clean for Weibo. This was a clean win, clean 2-0 from anybody in the world. Anybody would have taken this series, and they would have been happy with it, but good for Weibo. I actually think they played really well in this series. My player of the series is going to go to Crisp in the support position. He was just really good. He has been an anchor for this team. Really like Crisp. It's hard not to like Crisp. Everybody on BLG suffered last year just from being on that organization, and so I don't want to sit here and say like, oh, Crisp had an awful year. I felt like, I think I said this last year, him and Ben were definitely the two members of BLG that felt the most consistent over the course of the year. To me, to see him go to a team, to see him get to play with Light, who I thought was the saving grace of LNG for a majority of last year, and genuinely is one of the best AD carries in the entire world, to get to see these two play basically every single week, I mean, that is a luxury here on Weibo Gaming, and they proved that here. Light is just so ridiculously consistent. He gets his pentakill in game number 1 on the Varus. Shout out to On, good guy On, giving that over. but Crisp was really the one that I think stood out to me the most in terms of affecting that game in game number 2, a phenomenal game 2 on the Nami. He was everywhere on the map. Obviously, that lane 2v2 went super in favor of Light and Crisp, which we will get to in a minute, but Nami bubbles, I talk about this a lot. The difference between a top-tier Nami player and a low-tier Nami player is super obvious at a pro level. Someone who is very good at the champion and someone who is just playing the champion. Crisp can really play Nami, and you could see that, predicting where movement will be with bubbles, being able to consistently hit at least one, sometimes two people in major team fights, timing your ultimates to make sure that it hits the most amount of people possible and sets your team up for the most amount of success. Crisp is just really freaking good at the game of League of Legends. He is a top-tier support in the world, and he proved it again in this series, but that's not to take away from Light. Like I said, a pentakill in game 1's pretty great, but the Lucian game in game 2 was also really good. He didn't die a single time this series. His positioning is just so crucial to this team. It's funny because I was, banging the drum last year for Light, being like, hey, everybody, look at this guy. He's freaking good. He's the best player on LNG, one of the best AD carries in the entire league. He needs to be on an all-pro team. Of course, he didn't get the recognition last year because LNG didn't win games until the playoffs, in which case he did start to get recognition, but it's really good to see him on a team now where people are really starting to be like, oh, he's hyper consistent and hyper talented. Like, that is a dangerous combo at the highest level. And Weibo drastically needs that consistency because you're looking at this top side, and we'll get to the top side because, man, did they have a good series as well. But, the Shy, Karsa, and Xiaohu, not exactly the most consistent trio in the entire league. To have a player like Light is a huge luxury for this Weibo gaming team, and Crisp only makes that better. This bot lane is super good. Top side of the map, Karsa was the dominant one. I mean, the jungle matchup was entirely in favor of Weibo here. Gideon has shown some cracks in the armor, I will definitely say. Not a particularly good series from him. Karsa did a great job being able to generate some early leads in that game 1 in particular on the Elise, where he just completely dominated the early game. I mean, that game was over by like 6 or 7 minutes into the game because Karsa had full control of the map. Great job by Xiaohu on the Jace to be able to follow up with some stuff, but Karsa was really the one, I think, making a lot of the plays on the top side. And then big credit to the Shy as well. I know we talk about the Shy a lot on this channel, but he deserves to be talked about because when he plays good, they probably win. And this is a rare performance from the Shy. It's a non-carry performance where he doesn't int, and that is not normal. For him to just take a background role in his team's success, that is not typical of the Shy, but it is very welcome to see this bot lane being able to be given the keys and say like, hey, go, you can win us the games. Like, Karsa's going to invest a lot into Light and Crisp, and, the Shy's not going to get in the way. Like, that's a huge positive for Weibo. Xiaohu was really good, like I said, but Weibo honestly looked fantastic in this series, kind of getting rid of a lot of the worries that I had for this team after the last couple of weeks. But for Invictus Gaming, not the best series. You are going up against, Weibo, who I think is one of the most talented teams in the entire league, but you didn't exactly show up really in any lane. Nobody really did well. My dud of the series is going to go to Wink in the support position. It just felt like he was getting caught out so much. Again, I really hate when people pick Heimerdinger and then don't pressure lane. Like, what's the point of picking Heimerdinger if you're not going to do that? Zeri Lulu is fine into Lucian Nami, and typically I would advise for that. But again, you have to survive. You have to be able to get to the mid game. You have to not lose early, and unfortunately for Invictus, this bot lane could not lose early. Dove also had a really bad series, basically accomplishing nothing on the Sylas and the Akali. You Should Know Me basically did nothing on the top side. Very boring top side, which is definitely in favor of Weibo. And then, of course, Gideon was also really, really bad in the jungle position. I think if you wanted to give dud of the series to Gideon, if you wanted to give it to Wink, those are the two players that are definitely up for debate. It felt like Wink accomplished less good in the series, so I gave it to him, but Gideon had probably more bad, so I guess it's whatever you want to go for there. The Gragas game in particular was awful. He gave up the game by like 5 minutes because of just how poorly he played early on in that game. But overall, I would say Invictus is still fine. They're probably just a lot closer to where I had them for the last few weeks, somewhere around 7 or 8, right? I saw a lot of people putting them in the top 4. I was never committed to that. I always said they were probably a low-tier playoff team, and that seems to be what they are. I mean, there's a lot of teams vying for that attention right now, so they are going to have to get their shit into gear. But, a loss to Weibo certainly isn't the worst thing in the world. You Should Know Me has been a little bit down on his luck over the past few weeks, but On and Wink, I think, have been really good. They just couldn't get it done in this series, so hopefully Invictus has an easier time, going out there and pulling off some wins against maybe some easier competition, but Weibo just wasn't meant to be. As for Weibo on the other side, they're awesome. When they play at their highest potential, I mean, I've said this, but they're genuinely a team that can beat anybody in the world. JDG, T1 even, I think they can beat anybody in the world when they play at their best. It's just about getting their best. You have no idea if you're going to get that out of them on any given day. And so for Weibo, you're going to be really happy to have been able to get that here, but It's more just about the consistency. One series isn't going to prove to me that this team is entirely fixed. I'm going to need to see a large sample size of this team performing the way that they absolutely should be over the course of the year. But I will say, at the very least, this is a great start. Moving on now to day number 3, and we kicked off day 3 with a top versus bottom matchup that went even worse than expected. JD Gaming taking on FunPlus Phoenix. An 18-minute game in game 2. JDG's just freaking good when they win. I understand that this team has had some trouble. They've lost 2 series now against 2 very good teams, mind you. They haven't lost to, like, some no-name team or anything like that. They haven't just thrown a game against a bottom team, but when they win harder than anyone in the world, and it's not particularly close. When they are able to dominate a series, when they're able to just have players that are this much better, it's just not fair. It's like watching Little League Baseball go up against the New York Yankees, right? It's not fair watching this happen, and it was almost painful to watch this game too. Game 1 was kind of close, I guess, for a bit. It was a really good game, but Ruler ended up, getting really online on the Caitlyn in the bot lane. The Lucian Nami did not pay off going into Caitlyn Lux. Big shocker, and Caitlyn was able to just dominate that game. Again, an accelerated Caitlyn is a pretty big problem, and so you really weren't able to do a lot there. Kanavi on the Nidalee was really just skill-gapping hacker, like, all throughout the game, which is what you kind of have to do on Nidalee in this meta. Really good game from Knight on the rise there, and then 369, a little shaky in the top lane. A really good Fiora game, I would say, from Xiao Laohu, but for the most part, JDG just kind of cruised to victory, right? Game number 2, sheesh! I mean, I'm FFing at 15 in this one. It is just not... no thank you. No thank you. Knight obliterated Care. That Silas was disgusting in game number 2. Ruler on the Zeri. Who needs to scale? What if I just win early anyways? Like, what does it even matter? It just felt like cyberbullying, if I'm being entirely honest. This was not particularly fun to watch because it was such a destruction. It's hard for me to give analysis. JDG good. I don't know what you want me to tell you. This team is really good, and when they win harder than anybody. Ruler's going to get player of the series just because I feel like he was the more dominant one across both games. I think you could very realistically give this to Knight in the mid lane, who was also deathless in this series, by the way, and also dominated a game. Game 2 was really on Knight. Game 1 was more on Ruler, but whoever you want to give it to, it's just the JDG carries are popping off, right? People criticize me for calling Knight the best mid laner in the world. This is what the best mid laner in the world looks like. Someone who just makes the game unfair to play against. I get that there's competition there, but to not even put Knight in that category, I feel like is disrespect. And I still have Ruler as the best ADC in the world. I understand that he's had a couple of games where he's been a little iffy, but let's be honest, the dude's in the lead for LPL MVP right now because the amount of games that he has had where he has just completely obliterated whoever he's going into. I can think of that 2v4 in the bot river or the 75 different laning phases where he's up 40 CS. Like, he is just obliterating the LPL in terms of AD carries. It's disgusting. These two players are unfair on the same team, and you've got to play an entire year with this? Like, oh my god, it just feels like cheating. Missing is one of the best supports in the world. I don't think he missed a single Lux binding in game number 1. He was super freaking good. You have freaking Kanavi as your jungler and 369 as your top laner. Where does this... it's just... You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't fail to shock me how this team exists, right? Like, we can talk about T1 being the best team in the world right now, and I do believe they are. But if JDG plays like this, like at this level against anybody in the world... It's a no contest. It's not even close. That's the JD Gaming I want to see all the time. I want to see the JDG that plays like this, that obliterates FPX, that makes them look like they don't even deserve to be in the LPL, which we'll get to. Maybe they don't, because God, this team sucks. But, JDG's freaking good, and this is a scary performance from a team like this. As for FPX, you're just not very good. Xiao Laohu had some moments where he looked kind of okay. Care picked up some... let's say, revenge kills, some cleanup kills, if you will, but everybody else and every other play on this team was a complete disaster here. Game 1 was relatively close against Xiao Laohu, looked okay on the Fiora. Care had some moments on the Akali, but for the most part, bot lane dominated, and so the Lucian Nami could never get to that point in the mid-game where they could actually skirmish, and Hacker lost control of the jungle very quickly to that Nidalee, and so the game falls out of your hands. And then game 2, it's disaster for moment 1. LWX is going to get my dud of the series. I still see so many comments that are like, LWX is elo held. LWX is elo held. And I'll be like, you know, to be elo held, you have to be better than your teammates, right? Like, that has to be the case. But LWX has been bad this year. This isn't Doggo on Ultra Prime, who's playing really well on a team that just isn't very good, right? But they're able to scrape some wins together, and he's able to win some laning phases, and it's not, you know, Doggo, I think, on a better team could perform well. LWX is dragging FPX down. It's just the truth. He's not very good right now. He's been super good in the past. I was super complimentary of LWX back in 2021 when everybody kind of blew up on FPX. He was the best player on that team. He was really good in spring of last year, and then summer happened. Everything dissolved for him, and he's come back in 2023 and been just as bad, if not way worse. He cannot lane anymore. These Solution Nami performances were just awful. There's no explanation for why they were as bad as they are. Chocho is a much better support than Lele, even if we didn't get to see it in the series. And it just doesn't matter. His 2v2 skills have completely disapparated, and I don't know where they went. Hacker continues to be a major negative for this team in the jungle. At this point, I would just say go back to Haoya. I know he wasn't very good, but at least he had some early games that looked all right, and he's got some upside. Hacker just doesn't seem to be giving you anything. I still think Kerr and Zhao Laohu can be solid players, but right now this team is just bad. There really is no other way to put it. I think the bottom three has finally been broken through. We talked about the bottom three teams really feeling like the bottom three teams. It feels like FPX has actively earned their way into that bottom three, if not the bottom two or bottom one. This team has genuinely been one of the worst teams in the LPL, and honestly, I don't see that changing that much in the future. Not unless this bot lane finally gets its head out of its own ass. But, I mean, for JDG, nice. Like, good. You're awesome. You're really good. Play like this all the time, please. I'm tired of the stop-start that JDG offers you. I guess if they can skill check you so early on in the game that they destroy the series, that they're just going to do something like this, and they're not going to be able to do that against the best teams in the world. But if you can develop that macro, I mean, this team's going to genuinely be unstoppable. They are by far the most talented team in the world when they play at the highest level, and this is the kind of series that proves that. Moving on to our second series of day number 3 here, and it's a good one. It's a battle between two teams in my top 6 of my power rankings. We had LNG Esports taking on Bilibili Gaming, and LNG picks up the 2-1 series win. This is by far their toughest opponent so far this year, and they really passed the test. They're now sitting at 7-1, a ridiculously good start to the year for an LNG team that nobody really expected to be near the upper echelons of the standings, especially this early on into the season. A lot of changes being made for LNG, a lot of players having risks taken, you know, with them coming in, most notably the bot laner LP, who's being called up from LNG, and then Zika coming in the top lane, who's never really been on a successful LPL roster. Of course, you've got some veterans holding it down, Tarzan, Scout, and Hang, and really it's those veterans that have propelled them to start the year, because Tarzan and Scout have been phenomenal for LNG to start the season. Scout's gonna get my player of the game again here. We talked about this in the previous series, but, you know, I said Ruler might be the early season MVP favorite. Scout's right up there with him, man. Scout has been phenomenal for LNG this split. I would argue that this is his best split in a very long time, or at least his best start to the split in a very long time. I can't remember Scout being this much of a focal point for EDG in a very, very long time. So to see him come out and play a variety of champions, the Jace in Game 1, the Annie in Game 2, and the Azir in Game 3, and really do well on all of them, maybe with the exception of Game 2. It's just really impressive stuff, and he absolutely deserves Player of the Series. Most specifically, that Game 3 on Azir was just spectacular from Scout, and he's been able to navigate these team fights incredibly well. Obviously, he's really strong at being able to generate early leads, but look at the game times on a lot of these games. They do tell you the story here. Scout was really able to take over towards the back half, especially in that Azir game where he was phenomenal towards the back half of the game. Of course, big shout out to Tarzan. I think he has also been phenomenal over the course of the year, almost underratedly good. This has maybe been the best jungle mid duo in the LPL to start off 2023, and I know that's not shocking when you look at Tarzan and Scout as players, but in terms of the circumstance that they're in, and especially the 2 seasons that I think both of them are coming off of, for them both to arguably some of the top Bs, some of the top players in their roles in 2023, it's a huge accomplishment for both of them, and you gotta give them a lot of credit for that. LP and Hang were also a lot better in this series than I think they had been in a while. Hang playing a lot of engagers, I think it gets him back to something he's more comfortable on. He did try to go to a lot of the enchanters in summer of last year, and we all remember how that went. LWX and Hang as a bot lane for FPX were super disappointing disappointing over the course of 2023. Feels like Hang just wants to go back to more comfort, more engagers, wants to go for this more aggressive style. It's totally playable at this level right now. I just don't think it's ever going to be optimal. But if you want to pull out Leona in Game 3, Nautilus especially in Game 2, I think Nautilus is still very good, but Leona in Game 3, if you really want to pull it out, you can probably make it work. And you know what? They made it work. So shout out to them. LP and Hang were pretty solid this series. And then Zika in the top lane definitely showed some meh qualities. I would say that Bin was definitely the better top laner in this series, but Zika just needs to be solid up there because you have carries on this team in Tarzan and Scout. You just need to be solid up on the top side, and I think he absolutely was here. As for BLG on the other side, a lot of questions surrounding this BLG team, especially now that they're sitting at 500, at 4-4 after their first half of the regular season. It's not a particularly great record for a team that probably wanted to be sitting in the top 4 in the upper echelon of LPL teams going into the year. A lot of players have really underperformed, and I think you have to squarely look at the opposite of LNG, the jungle mid here for BLG being super disappointing. If Tarzan and Scout have been a huge benefit and a huge boon towards LNG so far this year, Jun and Yagao have never gotten on the same page, and they've never really been able to make this team better. I think you could give either of them dud of the series here. I'm going to give it to Jun in the jungle because I think Yagao was better in Game 2 when they did pick up that win. Yagao, without that Talia, I don't think they end up winning that game, but Jun was pretty bad in all of the games. Game 2 was fine. Excluding Game 2, I think everybody played well in Game 2, but Jun was really bad in Games 1 and 3, and that's the Vi experience, right? You're going to play into that Elise, and oops, I lost early game, and now I'm super squishy, and Elise can blow me up, and Jace can blow me up, and Ashe kites me out, and Braum just stops my entire engage, so what do? Okay, well now I'm in Game 3, and I can't get on Azir. Even if I do get on Zeri, I immediately die. Leona can peel me off, Jax can peel me off, Sejuani can peel me off. So what exactly does the Vi do here? I don't really know, but he went to it 3 games in a row, and it did not work. Again, I can't stress this enough. I don't like Vi as a pick in the meta unless you're, like, way better. Tarzan can pick Vi and pull it off because his team's going to be able to generate some early leads, and he's going to be able to play from an advantage state. Jun's not going to be able to do that. His team has not been able to do that. So, I don't know. I don't like the Vi pick here. I think the players that I want to shout out being kind of okay on the side of BLG, Bin in the top lane, who just continues to look like this team's best player. And then Elk, of course, also has had some good games. He was pretty bad in this series. I think LP was generally just better. He was, kind of an NPC in a lot of these team fights, really just not doing nearly enough damage, and he was really relied upon for damage. Obviously, going to the Draven in Game 1, you really want to get him online. And then the Kai'Sa in Game 3, you're the hyper carry of the team. You need to be able to win. He wasn't able to do that. I still think Elk is a good player, but not necessarily the best series coming out from him. I would say overall, BLG is a little concerning. Like, I'm not going to sit here and hit the panic button and be like, this team's not a playoff team. They're right down there with, the FunPlus Phoenix that we just talked about. Obviously not. But this team is not looking like a team that is genuinely going to contend for a world spot anytime this year. And that's just a disappointment again for BLG. This is the same exact story that this organization has gone through year after year after year. It doesn't matter who the players are. You bring them in and they don't work together, and then you ship them off and they get good again. And it's probably going to happen with Yagao, and it's probably going to happen with Elkanon, and it's probably going to happen with Ben and Jun. And BLG is cursed. That's the only thing I can say. It's the management, it's the org. Something is going on here because it's another year of you being mediocre and not really being able to diagnose why. But your players are underperforming, especially this jungle mid duo, and you're going to have to figure that out in order to climb back up the standings. As for LNG, you're sitting at 7-1, first place in the LPL right now. That's a pretty freaking good place to sit. I'm not exactly sure that they are the #1 team in the LPL, reflected by my number 5 ranking in the power rankings, but this team is still really, really good. I'm excited to see them face off against some tougher competition as the split goes on. They've had a relatively easy schedule up until this point. It's no longer easy. BLG was a very good first test, but it's going to get even harder as the split goes on. But if Tarzan and Scout can continue to dominate early and late games like they are right now, LNG legitimately might be one of the best teams in the world. Moving on now to our day 4. I guess you could call it day 4. It's more like day 5 because it's the Friday games, and I'm used to calling the Friday games day 5, but no Thursday games this week. I'm actually going to call them day 5 just for my brain to keep track, because then we got the weekend games that are 3 days apiece. So this is kind of the unofficial day number 5 here, and we kicked it off with a matchup between Ninjas in Pyjamas and Anyone's Legend. And NIP does pick up the win, although it's barely. AL is able to take that first game in the series. Not only are they able to take game number 1, they're able to take Dream out of the lineup after that victory. Pout comes back in to place in mid lane, and then NIP cleans it up. They are able to win the last 2 games of the series once Pout comes in and plays mid. Not that he was the only factor that ended up swaying in favor of NIP, but it is just kind of funny how that ended up happening. But golly, if the Ninjas lost this one, that would have been pretty freaking bad, because AL is not a team you really want to be losing to at this point in the season. They looked pretty good across both of the secondary games. You got to give them credit for that. Fodic and Zhuo have been pretty good as a bot lane duo. Definitely the bright spot of this team by a large margin. I've talked about it in the past. They're good. They're not great. They're not like the best bot lane in the region or anything like that. Fodic's not a top 5 ADC in the world like people thought he was last year, or like people were saying that he was last year. I was kind of pushing back on that. I think that's starting to come to light. A top 5 ADC in the world can win some of these games that they end up losing, but he's good. He's a solid player. He's certainly a top 5, 6, 7-ish ADC in the LPL, which is really, really good. It's a very good position to be in, and he had another good series here, but my player of the series pretty easily is going to go to Xiao Bao in the jungle. A really good jungle performance coming out for him. 2 Lee Sin games, obviously a very special pick for him. We've known that since the RNG days, but he pulls it out here, and he looks really, really proactive in the early game. I really like their mentality and how they drafted, especially towards the back half of the series. Game number 3 draft for NIP is actually really solid, in my opinion, and something that I think really benefits this team. You got Xiao Bao on a really early game, punishing jungler, in this case the Lee Sin, but I think you could replicate this with something like the Elise if you really needed to, right? Anything that's going to be able to punish some early problems. You've got a scaling top laner that can win the game late if he needs to, and then you've got a super supportive mid, and you're going to be playing for bot. You're going to be going bot over and over again because you draft the Draven, the hyper carry here in the bot lane. I like the strategy a lot. Fodic can carry games as long as you give him the resources, as long as he is put in the position where he can win. He can capitalize if the team sets him up. He can't create those situations himself in the bot lane, and so I like the strategy. If you can get the Draven super far ahead, you end up winning, and that's what happened here. Wasn't as simple as that. Invincible also got super far ahead in the top lane. Pout had a really good game on the Galio, and then Zhuo was really good with the engages on the Nautilus. But I would say overall, NIP had a very clear strategy that they wanted to go to in both of the last 2 games, and both of them were pretty solid. I would have hoped they would have closed out game 2 a little bit quicker, but I do understand, looking at their comp, how they kind of got to the end game. Maybe they had a little bit of trouble battling in the mid game, but overall, kind of solid series from NIP. Without the game 1 loss, I think you're looking at a pretty, positive picture for how this ended up going. And let me talk about this. I know people are still mad that Invincible's in, and if you watch my channel, you're probably not mad about it, because you probably would have gotten pissed at me saying, like, shut up by now. But let me just say this very quickly about Invincible versus Rich. Anybody who thinks that putting Rich in for NIP is immediately going to solve all their problems and will immediately make them a contending team, and it's going to fix everything, and Rich is going to be a top 1 or 2 top laner in the LPL, it's just naive. It's not understanding who Rich is as a player. Rich is constant. Rich is consistent. He is the baseline, right? He is someone who is going to suck in lane. He's going to give up lane leads, he's going to pick tanks, and he's going to go behind, but he's going to be fine in team fights. He's going to be really solid towards the back half of games. That's not somebody that's going to look good on a team that can't win in the early game, because then you have no team fight to win in the late game. And so I understand if you don't feel like you can win in the early game right now, going with someone like Invincible, who has shown a good propensity to be able to win lane early, and honestly has very good team fighting skills towards the back half of the game. What he doesn't give you is the consistency. Rich is going to be there game in and game out, probably giving you the same thing every game. Invincible's going to have some really good games. It's going to have some really bad games. For my money, I think Invincible's the better player to play here. I've talked about that all season long, but that's going to make Rich fans mad, and I understand it, whatever. But I would personally I understand the decision to go Invincible here, and I think it makes sense. But Xiao Bao, really good in the series, and a really good bounce back from him. As for anyone's legend on the other side, you suck. You really do. You're not very good. Betty and Sword Art actually looked kind of good in this series, which is definitely the first time this year I've said that. Even in their win last week, it didn't feel like Betty and Sword Art played particularly great. It very much felt like Pins and Xiao Hao and ZDZ and the top side really pushing them forward. But this was a really good series from the bot lane. They actually were able to generate pretty consistent leads in the bot lane, except for when Xiao Bao was giving them their assistance. And then all of a sudden, 3v2, it's a lot harder to play that. But really good on them, especially in game number 1 for being able to generate that lead with Varus and Annie into that Kalista Ashe. And then a really good bot lane performance game 2 from the Lucian Nami into the Aphelios Lulu. Now, obviously, you're supposed to win that early, but you have to go out and do it, and they did go out and do it. I think the problems arose on the top side, especially in their losses. ZDZ was really good in game number 1 on the Scion, and so was Xiao Hao on the Wukong, but they really struggled in the final 2 games of the series. Everybody who follows the channel knows how big of a fan of Xiao Hao I am in the jungle. I legitimately think that if you placed him on like BLG or a top team that has a jungler that's struggling right now, that he would be an upgrade to a lot of them, because I think he could be a top 5 jungler in the LPL in terms of talent, but it feels like the mental is finally starting to get to him on this AL team. It feels like he's finally being put in a position where he just is going for broke and going for a lot of these crazy plays, and sometimes your KDA is going to get deflated when you're playing Wukong on a losing team, but even so, some of these engages just weren't very good. This was, in my opinion, easily his worst series of the year, and I think it's been on a downward trend for him. This very much feels like Elk last year on Ultra Prime, who was really trying to start the year. That team was not winning, and he just gave up. He said, screw it. I'm going to play half-assed the rest of the year. Everybody already knows I'm good. I'm going to get a better contract next year, and I'm just going to forget about it. That kind of feels like what Xiao Hao's doing here, but not a particularly good series from him. I would say overall, AL is still not very good. They are starting to win games. I mean, they've won 7 games this year. That's more than a lot of the teams that are above them in the standings, but, series matter. You got to be able to close it out, and unfortunately, AL is just not able to do that, and this is another example of that. But for NIP, it feels like you're finally starting to get down to a starting 5 that you feel comfortable with. If Pao is the one you want to go with in the mid lane, Invincible, Xiaolin Bao, Pao, Photic, Zhuo is a pretty strong starting 5 to at least try and push for top 10. I'm not exactly sure that it's going to be possible, especially with how you played against some of the top teams in the region, but at the very least, it's probably going to get you closer than what you have been playing with over the course of the year so far. And then moving on to our second series of this, I guess, de facto day number 5. We had a really interesting one between two teams that I think are very close in skill level and very close in the standings. We had Team WE taking on Rare Atom. Both teams really vying for an opportunity to make the playoffs for the first time in a little while. I think Rare Atom actually did it in spring of last year, but obviously WE nowhere close in 2022. Have to go back to 2021 where they narrowly missed out on the World Championship, but this series goes in favor of that Team WE team really stepping up. This is a team that has looked very inconsistent over the course of the year so far, and I think that's putting it mildly, but a really good series win for WE coming out here over a Rare Atom team that had honestly kind of been streaking as of recently. So let's go ahead and go over the good and the bad. The good on WE is the jungle position. Hang, he looked really good in this series. He's going to get my player of the series for his performance. Hang is someone who has had a couple of really good games, a couple of really good early games in particular for this WE team, but has really struggled to transition a lot of those leads into the late game. So what do? They pick champions that really benefit a lot from generating early leads. Vi, Lee Sin, these are champions that really benefit a lot from having those early leads, from being able to be proactive in the early game, and they can set their teammates up really well to be able to carry a lot in the mid game. They're kind of expected to fall off, and so Hang's responsibility doesn't necessarily stay up throughout the rest of the game. I think that was super beneficial, super positive for WE overall as a unit, because this entire team kind of rebounded and responded to that in a very good way. Hang did a really good job in games 2 and 3, being able to go, kind of just dominate the early jungle matchup and generate a strong lead for his team. And then you're looking at players like Shanks on this Cassiopeia, very good game in game number 3. Hope on the Zeri in game number 2. Bubu on the Cho'Gath in game number 3. That can then take that in the mid game and in the late game and really carry the rest of the team to a win. And that's what happened here. WE with a very good game plan, and they executed on it really well. Like I said earlier, Hang was fantastic in the early game, setting his team up, but people had to make good of that, and I think they did. Shanks in game number 3, really good on the Cassiopeia. I love this game 3 draft. Cho'Gath Cassio into Sion Ahri. I actually think that's really, really strong. Cassio into Ahri isn't always a great idea because you're pretty susceptible to the charm, but I actually think Lee Sin helps with that a lot, and of course Cho'Gath helps with that a lot because he can just sit there and body block, and everybody knows Cho'Gath absolutely obliterates tanks. That execute threshold is really, really large, and so Cho'Gath into Sion has always been an incredibly positive matchup. I've talked about this a lot on the channel. I believe Cho'Gath was pulled out in the LCS a couple of weeks ago. It was some region, maybe it was the LPL. Somebody pulled out a Cho'Gath and did really well on it. And I was like, more please. Like, I want more Cho'Gath because this champion actually beats a lot of these hyper tanky top laners like Sion. Even something like a Cassante, I could see Cho'Gath being good against. Maybe not Cassante because he can dash out of the knockup, but Sion in particular, very immobile and is super susceptible to Cho'Gath just chomping him at the later part of the game. And so overall, really like the Cho'Gath pick. Bubu played it well. Shanks was really good on the Cassio. Hope and Awandi did a really good job laning in the second half of this series. You could talk about Awesome and Southwind being really good in that game 1, getting super fed on the Draven and just being able to take over, which is the case, but Hope and Awandi did a really good job the rest of the series of being able to stem the bleeding, win the lane 2v2, and go into the late game with a pretty solid lead and being able to team fight at a high level. WE honestly just looked very consistent over the course of this series, and that is a very good sign, I would say, for this team. As for Rare Adam on the other side, obviously not the worst series in the world. Losing to WE is not like a disaster or anything. You would have liked to have won this series because I do think you were kind of on the up and up and some of your players were playing really well, most notably Strive in the mid lane, who I think is really having a breakout season, like genuinely, like shockingly one of the best mid laners in all of the LPL. I've not really heard people mention his name as one of the big breakout stars of 2023 so far. I've heard a lot of other names, but Strive hasn't been mentioned nearly as much as I think he deserves with how he has played so far this year. Definitely start putting some respect on his name. I say that as he had a pretty bad series here against WE. This was easily probably his worst series of the year. He just didn't do that well in Shanks, who I think is a solid mid laner, especially in lane, but you're looking at playing Lissandra into LeBlanc, which is a counter matchup. You should win. You're looking at playing Ari into Cassio. That's a counter matchup. You should win. These are matchups that Strive should be able to come out and do well on, but he wasn't able to do it. He's far from the only player on the team to not play well. My dud of the series is going to go to Leon in the jungle. I think a lot of people are going to give him a lot of props for game number 1, and I think that's fair, but at the end of the day, Awesome still had to be the one to be able to carry the game on the Draven, but you cannot give him props for games 2 and 3, where he was playing the Lee Sin and the Vi, and he lost early game both times. Hang did a really good job being able to generate that lead, and Leon was left out to dry. Look at this game 2 comp. And let me tell you that they lost early. What are you supposed to do with Renekton, Lee Sin, Lucian when you lose early? Where do you go from there? You don't go anywhere, you lose the game. And that's unfortunately what ended up happening for RA. And then in game 3, they try to index a bit more into the late game, but look at the great draft coming in from WE. Some really smart decisions being made, and they're just not able to outplay those decisions. They end up losing that game as well. So Leon and Strive definitely, I think, letting the team down here in a very important series against WE. You would have liked to see them step up and really, like, cruise them to a victory, especially after that Game 1 win. They just weren't able to do it. Like I said, I want to give some shout out to Awesome. This was maybe his best series of the year. I'm quite low on Awesome, I think, compared to others' expectations. Some people are considering him the best next up-and-coming, ADC in this range. I just don't see it for him. I think he's good. I don't think he's great. But this was a pretty good performance on the Draven in Game 1, and he at least had some moments on the Ezreal in Game number 3 where he was trying to keep the game close. But overall, Rare Adam kind of got outplayed throughout the rest of the series, and that's definitely a little disappointing. I still think that this team is okay. I think that big cluster of teams, basically from 8 or 9 to like 13, are all super close together, and I think you could basically put them in any order. Both of these teams do fall into that category, but Rare Adam with a crucial loss here that I think moves them down the totem pole just a little bit. And then for WE, you're moving up the totem pole. You were in the 11th spot the last few weeks. You could be reclaiming that after this week is over with this nice win. This team really, really wants to make playoffs, and I think they do have the talent to do so. Hope and Awanda are solid. Hang and Shanks are solid. Obviously, there's some inconsistency that comes with this team, just naturally speaking, but there is a world in which WE can become a top 10 team in the league, and I think after the disaster for them that was 2022, that is probably the best thing I could possibly say about them. Moving on now to our super days. It's time to jump into our 2 weekend days, our typical day 6 and day 7, but this time, I guess it's day 5 and day 6. I'm not really sure how to classify that, but kicking us off and kicking off our super day number 1 is a matchup between Royal Never Give Up and ThunderTalk Gaming, and RNG is able to pick up the 2-0 series win. Really, really big win for RNG. It really does feel like they are back on track, pretty much all the way back on track at this point. And you know what? You know who never left? This bot lane. I understand Ming was gone for a bit. He didn't get to play. Bunny was in. Gala was still playing well, but, they weren't necessarily dominating the 2v2 because Bunny just wasn't making the same kind of impact early on in games. Well, Ming is back now. He's back with Gala, and they have very quickly reclaimed their throne as maybe the best bot lane in the LPL, or very near that. Obviously, JDG's right up there. You could put Weibo Gaming right up there as well. Top Esports is always going to be in that conversation. But RNG deserves to be just as close as anybody in that conversation. Ming is playing out of his mind this week. It's going to be another Player of the Series award this week for Ming, because not only is he doing it on, the ADCs and Ashe in game number 1, he's able to hit those arrows, he's able to really dominate the early laning phase, which is super important in this matchup. If you can get Zeri ahead, that's going to be massive, because obviously she's going to scale in team fights a lot better than the Varus. If Gala's going to have gold here, it's going to be a problem for ThunderTalk to have to answer that. And then in game number 2, it's just the opposite. It's Zeri and Engager, which is something that we really have not seen work at the pro level over the past few months, and I mean even the past year or so. Zeri's been super popular, but to get the most out of Zeri, you typically either need a lot of lane pressure from something like an Ashe or even I guess like a Caitlyn if you really want to go in that direction, or you need an Enchanter that's going to be able to enable her in the back half of the game. Engagers usually don't synergize super well because Zeri doesn't need time. She has time. She can peel off her own self, and she can really do a lot on her own. She doesn't need like a Nautilus to go in and CC an enemy so that she can blow him up. She just needs the shielding to make sure that she doesn't die when she goes in and, you know, tries to get all the damage off. But you know, Ming is so good at Nautilus, and Ming is so good at these engage patterns that he sets Gala, he sets Angel on this Jace up so well throughout the rest of this game number 2 that the fact that Zeri doesn't usually like an engager doesn't matter here because Ming is so deadly with how he's able to use the Nautilus, and I'm honestly just super impressed. I understand that Ming has been one of the best supports in the world for many years now, and I know, you know, me saying that on the channel last year was definitely contentious. I had him as my #1 support going into the World Championships last year, but I just don't think much has changed, right? Like, I think that every single year he comes out and proves that he is one of, if not the best support in the world. And I understand that, you know, this year's been a little bit slower for RNG, but Ming coming back into the team has completely revitalized this entire organization. They're now sitting at 5-4, above 500 for the first time all year long. Gala and Ming are playing fantastic. They're beating good teams like ThunderTalk, who are not complete pushovers. And I'm honestly proud of RNG and this bot lane. Of course, as much as I'm crediting Ming, you gotta give a lot of credit to Gala as well. This bot lane's not going to function as well as it does if it's only one of the players playing well. Even if I do think Ming is the one setting everything up right now, Gala was spectacular in this series. His positioning is near perfect on that Zeri, basically never in a position to be punished for any aggression, which is very difficult on Zeri in general, especially when you have an engager as a support, because that can sometimes overcommit you to a fight. You can see the Nautilus hook get landed, and you can be like, oh, I gotta go in. I gotta go and try and win here. And it can overcommit, especially someone like Zeri, to a fight, and you can get caught out by maybe a Varus, or maybe a Cassiowold, or a Vi, or even a Braum at points, right? Like, there are ways for you to get punished for that, but Gala played on the edge of danger super well in this series, and it just goes to show how good these two members of the bot lane are. Other members of this team that played well, Angel had a really good series, a really good Jace game too, coming out from Angel, but also big credit to the Azir game 1. It really does feel like they have finally found a stabilizing presence in that mid lane. Angel has been a lot better than Tong Yuan has been over the course of the year so far, and it definitely feels like ever since they settled on putting Angel in, when they solidified that, okay, you're the starter, and we're actually going to play with you every game, no more of this flip-flopping, Angel has stepped up and been that really good secondary carry that he can be, that he had been on Weibo and on Suning for quite a long time. Remember, it's kind of hard to make a World Finals. Angel's made a World Finals, so, you know, he's definitely not a pushover. And then the other player I really want to shout out is actually Breathe in the top lane. Breathe's been getting a lot of negative press, I would say, over the course of 2023 so far. Didn't exactly have the best start to the year, but I would say he had another really solid series here. He's just great on this weak side. He fits perfectly into a team that really wants to play around bot lane, and now that you have a really strong bot lane, what with Ming coming back in, that you can really play around, Breathe is back in his comfort zone, I would say, on that top side, not necessarily needing to be this dominating carry in the early game like I think the team kind of expected him to be early on in the season. I just think everything for RNG right now is going well. I like the way that they've constructed their team. I like the way that they're drafting, and I really like the way that they're playing. So big credit to RNG. They are right back in as one of the best teams in the league after a really tough early start. But as for ThunderTalk on the other side, not the worst series in the world. Again, losing to a surging Royal Never Give Up is never the worst thing. This is a very good team that you're going into. Obviously, you would have probably wanted to win this game, or at least a game in this series, to kind of prove like, oh yeah, we deserve to be in the top 10, and we are a playoff team, and you know, we've really rebounded, and now we're on the upswing. Didn't necessarily happen. Game 1 was close. There were certainly moments in Game 1 that looked good. Want to give a lot of credit to UCal. I still think he's looking pretty solid as a mid laner. Actually, genuinely one of the best mid laners in the LPL right now, but the rest of the team, unfortunately, just couldn't keep up, and that's to be expected. Honestly, the skill gap here is a little bit large, and that's why I didn't see ThunderTalk as like a top 6 potential team going into the year. I know a lot of people had them in like their A tier or like the top of their B tier, which was a little surprising to me. This is a team that definitely still has its flaws, but you know, they did their best, I would say, in this series. Credit to UCal, but some of the problems that they ran into were the bot lane kind of getting a little run over. Huanfeng and Yao Yao haven't necessarily been the dominating force that I was hoping that they would be for ThunderTalk. Yao Yao is going to get my dud of the series here. 2 engagers coming out from him, or I guess an engager and a protector coming out from him. The Leona in game 1, I just do not understand. You're really never going to be able to get onto the Ashe or the Zeri. They're basically just going to keep, you know, kiting you out until you eventually die, and that's what happened in game 1, especially with the Nazir. You have Wukong for Peel. There's a lot of ways to get this Leona off of you on this enemy team, and it definitely did not work out. That's why I don't really like Leona as a pick right now. And then Braum in game 2, I think, makes a little bit more sense. It gives you the option to protect against these all-ins that obviously RNG is going to want to go for, but unfortunately, Ming is just better, and so the Nautilus ends up being incredibly versatile and incredibly effective anyways. Despite the fact that the Braum is there, they're able to generate a pretty large early lead, and the game is over from there. Huanfeng, not particularly bad, but just didn't have the opportunity to generate a lot of gold on the side of ThunderTalk. And then I would say both members of the top side kind of lost here. Hoya, not nearly as impactful as Breathe. Hoya going for some more aggressive trades with his champions, I would say, early on in this series. You go for the Gwen in game 1. You really need to be able to beat the Sion early because you're just not really going to be able to kill him super easily in the late game. I understand Gwen's a little bit of a tank buster, but Sion's a little bit of a different story, and that ends up happening. Gwen doesn't get ahead, and she's relatively useless in game 1. And then the Cassante in game 2, you really want to be able to kind of dominate that early laning phase, and it just never really happened for Hoya on the top side. And then Beishwan in the jungle, the Elise, the Vi, some early game junglers that really want to get ahead. That's a very bold strategy to play against an RNG team that is, quite frankly, just probably better than you, and it just ended up not working out. I would say ThunderTalk overall is still solid. They're probably exactly where we thought they were, but RNG is definitely a team that is surging, and they are actually good. Like, they are for real levels of good. I think the LPL is very quickly turned into like a top 7. I think everybody in the top 7 is actually really, really solid. I mean, BLG might be falling even further than that. You know, who knows? It might just be a top 6, but RNG definitely deserves to be considered in that top 4, like, adjacent area right now with how they are playing. They have been absolutely destroying people ever since they got their full lineup back in. They felt a lot more comfortable, and honestly, they've looked really good doing it. If this is the RNG we're going to get for the rest of the year, that's a really, really good sign for the LPL. Moving on to our second series of day number 6 here, and it's an interesting one. Top team versus bottom team. Those can always go at least a little bit interesting in the LPL. We had Ultra Prime taking on Edward Gaming, and EDG picks up the 2-0 series win. Another 2-0. A lot of 2-0s this week, which I guess helps me out because I can talk about them pretty quickly, and this one was just as dominant as any of the other ones. EDG looking really good in a win over a team they really should be beating, and that's a good sign. Where exactly did they go right? Well, in a lot of different places, but mostly, I would say, in the bot lane. That was definitely the shining force of EDG in this series, and honestly, this bot lane's been really good over the course of the year so far. My player of the series is going to go to Mako, but you cannot discredit or disrespect what Leave was able to do in this series. A huge contribution overall. They played the Caitlyn Annie in game number 1. That is a ridiculously oppressive lane. Everybody knows about Caitlyn plus Poke Mage. You know, that's a huge, you know, Caitlyn Lux, Caitlyn Morgana, whatever you want to go there. I guess Annie fits into that relatively well in that same vein with the shield. Can really enable Caitlyn to play super aggro in the early game, which is exactly what she wants to do. And you know what? They played it incredibly well. They were able to generate a really strong lead, even though, holy crap, Fofo's Azir was definitely the show stealer, I would say, in game number 1. But game number 2 was all about the bot lane again because it was Lucian Nami. And now, we've actually seen Lucian Nami really struggle recently, not only in the LPL and the LCK and the LEC and the LCS. Every single region is kind of struggling to have the same kind of impact on Lucian Nami that they were having earlier on in the season, especially comparing what they're able to do right now to, you know, maybe some of the other early game bot lanes. Like, you're going into Caitlyn Annie in this opportunity, right? You really need to step up. It's going to be very difficult for you to generate that early lead, and you really actually have to make that mid game matter a lot. You have to be super proactive from like 7 to 14 minutes into the game, or else you're just never going to hit that power spike. Caitlyn's going to be stronger than you at the beginning of the game, and she's going to be stronger than you once you hit 3 items, and so you have to capitalize on that 1 item power spike that Lucian likes to hit. But Leave, luckily, is just better. Like, he just plays super good in game number 2. Big credit to Mako. Again, I always talk about this, but Nami players can either be really good or just kind of average, and Mako is a very, very good Nami player, as we saw in this series, and he definitely deserves my player of the series. Not only did he play really well here, but of course, the historic legendary assist figure that he was able to hit. He just hit 7,500 career assists in the LPL. That's more than like 2,000 ahead of second place. Mako is just so far above everybody in terms of the greatest support in LPL history right now that it's insane in terms of the metrics. I mean, obviously you could talk about peak and stuff, but Mako's right up there with anybody in terms of that as well. He's just an awesome player, and it's great that we get to watch him kind of in his prime, or at least he's been in his prime for quite a while, but he's continuing to be an absolute superstar here for EDG, and him and Leave have a really good chemistry. Leave has come in, and I was super high on him, obviously, going into the year. People who watched my preseason video will know that he was the player that I was most excited for coming up from the LDL in 2023, but even I didn't expect him to be able to take to the league nearly as quickly as he did. He has quickly become, like, genuinely one of the most consistent AD carries in the LPL. ADCs in the LPL can sometimes be a little bit up and down, but Leave, generally speaking, just wins lane and is really solid in the late game. He's not going to completely dominate and, break open a game by himself, but he is going to make it very difficult for the enemy team to win, and he's going to be able to generate leads super, super consistently, which is all you really need on a team where you have Fofo dominating in the mid lane in a lot of these team fights. You're looking at the Azir game in game number 1 where he was spectacular. Eevee was really good in the Victor game too, but really it was Fofo game 1 that was like standing out like, oh, this guy's like legit. And we've been saying that all split long. I mean, Fofo has maybe been the single best mid laner in the LPL so far this year. He's certainly in the conversation, and it's pretty insane to say that. Scout, Rookie, Fofo, those are the 3, Knight, those are the 4 that have really come to mind, I would say, in terms of how they've been able to perform in 2023, and nobody really expected Fofo to be in that conversation after how he performed last year. So overall, just a really good series for them and a really good series for EDG. As for Ultra Prime on the other side, they just aren't talented enough to be able to go up against a team like EDG and actually hang. It's not exactly their fault. They really shouldn't be able to, right? Doggo's really been the one that's carrying them in a lot of their wins, but going up against Leave and Mako, they are just simply a better bot lane, and so Doggo and Baolan never get that lead that they really, really need in order to snowball Ultra Prime out of control. I actually want to give a little bit of credit to Ching in the mid lane. He was actually kind of okay in the series, one of his better series in quite a while. He's been a huge problem, I would say, for Ultra Prime in the mid lane, but he was kind of okay against EDG, which is a little bit surprising, but it was the main members of the team that really couldn't step up. I already talked about Doggo and Baolan not really being able to lane against Leave and Mako because Leave and Mako are simply just better, but my dead of the series is going to go to Ning in the jungle, who basically had no control the entirety of the series. The Wukong was bad in game number 1. The Vi was way worse in game number 2. Again, don't pick Vi if you're the worst team. If you're Ultra Prime going into EDG, that Vi's just not going to work. You're going to ult onto the Victor in the backline. You're going to immediately get Nami bubbled, and then you're just going to die. Like, there's nothing else you can do. You're going to get Maokai point and clicked. You're going to get Renekton. Something is going to happen, and you're not going to be able to survive, because if you're not ahead, you're not a bruiser. If you are playing from behind, you are incredibly squishy as that Vi. And so Ning was really punished for that, but overall, Ultra Prime kind of performing as expected. This is a team that, while they picked up a pretty solid win earlier in the week against OMG, they're really not like a playoff contender. They are one of these teams that is just kind of on the outside looking in and isn't going to be particularly, like, I guess, competitive, but I mean, they're going to push a team like EDG. They're going to make it a little bit difficult for them to win a game, but at the end of the day, EDG should be able to take, 9 games out of 10 against Ultra Prime, and that's kind of what we saw in this series. For Ultra Prime, we know what they are. They're probably still going to move up in the power rankings after this week because that win over OMG was huge, but losing to EDG definitely puts a little bit of a damper on the week, I would say. And then for EDG, you're just really solid, really consistent, and that's really what you need to be in the LPL right now. We have a lot of teams that have incredibly high ceilings but don't necessarily play to them all the time, especially teams above them in the power rankings. If EDG can just be one of these teams that is consistently beating up on the teams that are below them, consistently proving that they deserve to be into the top 4, they are going to be a team that can contend for the LPL title, and I think that's a really, really good sign, especially with the uncertainty of a lot of these players on the roster. Moving on now to our third series of the beginning of the weekend here, and it's probably the series of the week, at least on paper. This is the one everyone was looking forward to, I would say, the most going into week number 6. It's a top-of-the-table clash between JD Gaming and Top Esports, a rematch of the 2022 Summer Finals in the LPL. And just like last time, JD Gaming is able to get the better of TES And honestly, it's just a good sign overall for JDG. It is really hard to look at this as anything but a massive positive for this JD Gaming team, because we've seen them come out and we've seen them be able to dominate some of the worst teams in the league, but they've struggled against some actual competition. They struggled against EDG. They struggled against Weibo Gaming, but coming out against Top Esports, a team that maybe looks like the most consistent in the entire league right now, for you to come out and 2-0 them in such good fashion, I think is a really good look for a JDG team that was desperately needing to look like this. And overall, I think almost everybody on the team showed up and did their part. You could talk about 369 looking really, really good in the top lane matchup, even with a lot of attention being shown to that top side by Top Esports. And then you could talk about Ruler and Missing being really consistent towards the bot side. A lot of mistakes coming in from the Top Esports bot lane that Ruler and Missing did a great job capitalizing on. But really, when you're talking about the main focal points for this series, it's the jungle mid duo of JD Gaming, Kanavi, and Knight, who really stepped up. Knight with a phenomenal game 1 on the Annie. This champion is ridiculously strong. I was really intrigued to see what was going to happen in the Knight and Rookie matchup. Two of the best, if not the two best mid laners in the entire region going head to head here, and Knight comes out on top. He was awesome in game number 1, really was able to change the tide of that game, but getting into game number 2, it was all about the Lee Sin kicks. Absolutely huge game coming out from Kanavi. Some really good early ganks to set JDG up really well, and then we get to the late game where it's just Lee Sin kick on the Draven after Lee Sin kick on the Draven. Super important late game control over for Kanavi, and probably his best series of the year, if I'm being entirely honest. He's probably had more dominant series in terms of where he's been able to destroy people, but in terms of, you know, looking at this as, oh, Kanavi, like, actually played incredibly well, this might just be his highest quality series of the year. So big shout out to Kanavi. He's going to get my player of the series here. He wasn't perfect in game number 1. Certainly had some moments on the Lee Sin in game 1 where it felt like he was getting readjusted to the champion going into that Elise. But game number 2 was all Kanavi all the time. Tion, unfortunately, was on the back foot for most of game 2 on the Elise, even though he had a pretty solid game number 1, I would say, on the Elise. But Kanavi was just a lot better. And then I already talked about how Knight dominated the mid lane matchup. Really, really fun to watch these two play at the highest level. I've talked about it in this video already. It's just unfair when these two are playing at the best that they possibly can, because Kanavi and Knight might just be the two best players in the world. And so to have them both on the same team and to have them both actually be able to play together and have good synergy together, it just feels ridiculous. Kanavi was also going bot lane a lot, making sure that that Draven wasn't going to get ahead. This is how you play against a Draven. I talked about this a lot in my LEC review. If you've got a Draven on the team, they're probably going to be the target of that team's jungler. They're going to want to snowball the Draven, maybe try to shadow your bot lane so that that doesn't become a problem. And that's what Kanavi did. He made sure that Ruler and Missing were in a good spot. He made sure that Jackie Love was not in a good spot on that Draven pick. And you get to the mid game here, and the Varus is just stronger because the Draven hasn't gotten any cash out kills at all. And then you get to the late game and Draven's not going to be able to deal nearly enough damage to be able to carry these team fights. You're looking at the rest of the damage dealers. Gnar had gold, but Gnar's not going to be able to carry a team fight. Elise is not going to be able to carry a team fight. Victor, I guess in the perfect scenario, could carry a team fight, but it's going to be very difficult, especially against a Gangplank Lee Sin. It's going to be very difficult. And like I said, you know, Draven's not going to be able to carry here. So once you hit that late game, because of how well Kanavi played early on that Lee Sin and the good decisions that he made, it was very difficult for TES to actually do anything. So big credit to JDG. It felt like they played the game exactly how they should have, and everybody, really genuinely everybody, stepped up for this win. And then for Top Esports on the other side, it's just unfortunate. Jackie Love's gonna get my dud of the series. His positioning, especially in that crucial game 2, was just bad. He was walking up and playing way too aggro on the Draven. Obviously, JDG was going to target you. If you get that Draven behind, like I already said, you're just not going to be able to win a lot of these team fights towards the back half of the game, even the skirmishes in the mid game. And Jackie Love didn't respect that. He didn't respect Kanavi coming down and punishing him, and he certainly didn't respect him late game in team fights. He was stepping up, trying to do as much damage as he could, but for the most part, it was a lot of tactical inting. He was trying to get damage out. He got a lot of damage out early on in the fight, and then he would die, and then TES would have no way to clean up anything that he was able to set up. And so overall, Jackie Love, I thought, played kind of poor. Of course, that's what you get with Jackie Love. These aggressive plays, posturing incredibly aggressively. Sometimes it's going to work out. Sometimes it's not going to work out. Unfortunately, in this series, it did not work out for Top Esports, and it it became a problem, but he was far from the only player to underperform. Qingtian in the top lane, you were really hoping that he was going to be like one of the better top laners, I would say, in the region. He's been pretty solid to start the year, but this series, he wasn't particularly good. He was actually given a lot of resources, I would say, by Tian in that game number 2 after they realized that the Draven was going to get behind. He was given a lot of plates. He was given a lot of gold on the side of top esports, and he really wasn't able to do anything with it. The ults in the late game team fights, I don't even know if they came out, but if they did, they weren't super effective, and so you end up with just this kind of meh tank, this off tank that isn't really able to do all that much in the late game. I would say Qingtian and Jackie are definitely the two that stood out as being underperformers. Tian had a really good game in game number 1. He actually performed pretty solidly, out-jungled Kanavi for the early portion of that game, but unfortunately, Knight just was able to take over. You had Ruler doing a ton of damage on the Varus, and they weren't able to win the late game team fights, at least didn't set the rest of the team up well enough. And then Rookie and Mark were fine. They didn't necessarily make any major errors. They just weren't exactly positive forces moving TES forward. But what does this mean outlook-wise for both teams? Well, for top esports, frustrating loss, but it's not the worst thing in the world to lose to probably the most talented team in the world, right? You're going to be able to rebound from this. If any team is going to be able to collect themselves mentally, I have a feeling it's going to be this top esports one. Rookie, Jackie Love, Tian, they're used to losing games. They know what losing games in the LPL feels like. I'm sure they're going to be able to get back on their horse and get back to being consistent after this one, but unfortunately, this just shows that JDG still sits atop the LPL. I was right to keep them at number 1 in my power rankings, even though they had been struggling, because the potential of this team, if they play at their highest level, is just untouchable. They went up against a really good, a genuinely really good top esports team. Let's not get that twisted. And they just beat them. They just looked better, which is a really good sign for JDG. They already dominated earlier this week, doing it again here against top esports. If they can keep this up, I mean, I'm really, really going to be excited to see this team in playoffs and then hopefully eventually at MSI. Moving on now to our final day of LPL action here in week number 6, and we kicked off the day with a pretty intriguing matchup. It is a bottom-tier matchup between two bottom-tier teams, but those can be pretty fun sometimes, and this one was no exception. We had FunPlus Phoenix taking on LGD Gaming, and LGD picks up the win. FPX is really struggling right now, and them losing to LGD is certainly not a good sign. It is not at all where they wanted to be at this point in the season, but credit to LGD. This is a team that I think many people, me included, just wrote off as not being very good, and maybe they're okay. Like, I don't think that they're, a playoff team, but clearly they're not bottom 1, which is kind of what they've proven. This is their 3rd series win of the year. That's 3 more than I expected them to get, especially by week 6. So pretty solid start to the year, all things considered for LGD. And honestly, the series was pretty good for them. I mean, FPX certainly had some moments. Game number 1, Hacker LWX kind of pairing up to be incredibly strong in the mid game. That Wukong Jin combo, it is incredibly volatile and can be pretty dangerous in the right hands if you do have the right players to play with it. And I do think they played well in that game number 1. It was just the rest of the games where I think everybody kind of fell off. Maybe not LWX nearly as much on the Jin, but everybody else really had a bad series. And then LGD, on the flip side, really stepped up. The players that I really want to shout out on the side of LGD, Meteor in the jungle. He has been awful to start the year. I would say maybe the worst jungler in the LPL to start 2023. And now he finally has his best series of the year. He finally has a series where it's like, okay, well, this is good. This is genuinely good League of Legends. He pulls the Sejuani out in game 2, just like he did in game 1, but a much better performance from him that time. And then the Elise game 3 was a lot better than he has shown at any point this year. He's pulled the Elise out a lot over the course of 2023. It has very rarely worked for this LGD team, but it definitely worked in game 3. This is probably why they were picking it so often. Something must be going on in scrims, but a good series for Meteor. You're just hoping that this can lead to more. Obviously, Meteor's a former, top player in the LPL. This is somebody who at one point in time was considered the future of jungle in the LPL on BLG, but obviously one thing led to another. Some off-the-rift drama with Fofo on BLG that I don't particularly want to get into, and, he's out of the league for last year, and he comes back, he's on a bad team, he's not necessarily playing well. It's just good to see him kind of get back into his groove a bit here. The other player that I want to shout out is the other player who's been really bad this year, and maybe even worse, Xiaoshu in the top lane, who has maybe been the worst top laner in the LPL so far in 2023. To see him come out and honestly just be better than Xiao Laohu, especially towards the back half of this series, super impressive stuff coming out from Xiaoshu. Hopefully he can keep that up. I really hate ragging on rookie players, especially ones that just get tossed onto bad teams like Xiaoshu did here with LGD, but he really maybe has been this team's worst player over the course of 2023. He's caused a lot of problems on the top side for LGD, so to see him come out and genuinely be a positive force for this team, especially on that Gragas in game number 3 where he just obliterated Zhao Laohu in that top lane matchup, it's just a really good sign, and you're hoping that he's going to be able to keep that. I think everybody else on the team was fine. LPC and Jin Zhao were fine. They weren't necessarily the focal points. And then Haichao was okay. Certainly didn't have any like flashy moments, but mid lane wasn't exactly the lane that was invested in the most in this series. Overall, it was the top side of the map, surprisingly enough, that LGD played through and was able to win the series through. As for FPX on the other side, bad loss. I mean, you suck. You're 1-8. I may have been too high on this team, putting them at 14 all year long. Like, that's really where I'm at now, is this team is not very good. They are bottom 2, I think, at the very best, right? Like, this team just really struggles to win a lot of games. I know a lot of people are saying that players like LWX are, you know, elo held. I talked about this a bit earlier in the video. LWX has been really bad over the course of this year. It's not like he's been playing well and the rest of the team has sucked. You don't go 1-8 with a good AD carry in this meta. You just don't. And for LWX's credit, I do think he responded to his really poor series earlier this week with a pretty decent one this time as the Jhin. You're not going to be able to carry as Jhin, and this is probably the one series where I would go like, yeah, it looked like LWX was elo held. You probably shouldn't have had him on the Jhin, but at the end of the day, it's easier to take a large sample size than it is to take a small sample size. This is the small sample size. LWX actually contributing and being a positive influence on the team, that has not been the norm over the course of 2023, even if it was the case over this series. And so it's just hard for me to sit here and be like, get LWX off this team, put him on an actually good team, because it just doesn't feel like he has played well enough to earn that. Hacker played well in game number 1 on the Wukong, but outside of that, everybody was really disappointing. My dud of the series is going to go to Zhao Laohu in the top lane, who just got completely run over by Xiaoshu in the second half of the series, which is just awful. I mean, that is as bad as it gets. For Zhao Laohu, this top lane for FPX has been a huge problem over the past year or so. I mean, really over the past 2 or 3 years, really the entirety of FPX's existence, they really have never had that superstar top laner that they need to have. It's always been someone who can make it work, but they've been trying to make Zhao Laohu work for many years now. It just doesn't seem like it's ever going to come to fruition. Zhao Laohu in, Fearness in, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't seem like top lane is ever going to be a strength for this team. And for them to lose to maybe the worst top laner in the entire league, that's just a really bad sign. Like, there's really no other way to put it. That is a bad look. He was awful in game number 3 on the Jax, and he had 0 impact in game number 2. So, overall, definitely deserved it. I would say outlook-wise for both of these teams, FPX, like I said, is bottom 2. They are a bottom 2 team in the LPL, and that is disastrous. For a team with this kind of talent, Care, even LWX, right, like Zhao Laohu, you know, these are players that should not at any point be bottom 2 in the LPL, but that's where we are at, and that's just reality. I mean, they have to figure something out. They've tried to make changes. Haoye has come out and Hacker has come in. That's not really been an upgrade. Lele has come out and Cho has come in. That's not really been an upgrade. I don't really know what else you can possibly do here for FPX, but it's a disaster of a season here in 2023 so far. And then for LGD, I mean, awesome. You got your 3rd win of the season. I think you're really just looking for development from your young players. I don't think they went into the year expecting to win a lot of games. So to be sitting with 3 wins at 3-6, you know, 9 series through the year, I actually don't think is that disappointing for this LGD team. I think they're going to be feeling pretty okay about that. This team is probably still not a playoff contender or anywhere near that, but at least they're competitive. At least they're going to be able to step up and beat teams that are really struggling like FPX. That's a really good sign, and I think seeing the top side perform as well as they did in this series is definitely positive overall for the development. And, you know, hopefully LGD can kind of get on the right track. I do like some of their young players. It's just all about, you know, kind of getting them on the same page and seeing who you want to work with after 2023. Moving on to our second series of the final day here in the LPL this week. And it was an interesting one. We started with lower teams. We're moving up to the mid-tier teams here in our second series of the day as we had a battle between OMG and Invictus Gaming, and OMG picks up the win. A big win coming out from them. Obviously, a little bit of a rough patch coming in from Invictus Gaming. They're finally starting to face some tougher competition and perhaps getting tested a little bit more than maybe they were expecting. But OMG doing a really good job in this series, being able to capitalize on a lot of the mistakes that Invictus is making. Honestly, OMG looked really, really good in this series. They were aggressive, they were proactive, and that's really what I wanted to see out of this OMG team. I think at times there have been moments where they are more willing to take what the enemy gives them rather than scratch and claw their way to their own advantages. It's really good to see a side of this team where they can go out and they can actively create a lot, especially this jungle position, which I think has been a little bit of a problem for them over the course of this year. Being able to generate early leads, being able to make early plays around that jungle position. It's been a little bit tough for OMG, quite frankly, over the course of 2023 so far. Not to say that Aki is a bad player, but when you're looking at the carries of this team, when you're looking at Shanji, when you're looking at Cream, when you're looking at Abel, I feel like Aki doesn't necessarily quite stand up on that same pedestal. I think he's a fine jungler, but not necessarily someone who I think is amazing. So to see him come out and just have a really good series against another jungler who's really struggling right now in Gideon, I think it's just generally speaking a good sign. But when you're looking at the main threats that OMG was able to have in this series, it's a pretty easy look at the two carry roles for them. Both Cream and Abel were so good in this series, it is really hard to look anywhere else on this OMG team. You gotta give credit to Aki, gotta give credit to Shanji, gotta give credit to PP God, but Abel and Cream really stepped up when it mattered the most. Abel's gonna get player of the series for me. I think Cream on that Yone both games, I mean, this is playing into his specialty. Obviously, we talk about the melee mids for Cream being an absolutely huge deal for him. Him being really able to take over a lot of games against really good competition on those melee mids. Obviously, still some major question marks on what he's able to play outside of that, but when he gets a pick like Yone, he's really going to be able to dominate on it. And then Abel in the bottom lane, we've always talked about the Samira. Obviously, the Samira is really good, but he can play a lot of these AD carries that are kind of off meta right now at a super high level. The Zaya's always been something he's been good at, but the Aphelios last year was a go-to for OMG. It was something they really felt comfortable playing towards the back half of the game. They can rely a lot on their solo laners to be able to win early, and then Abel's kind of their insurance policy, as I like to call him, over the course of 2022. That's how I like to describe OMG, and that's definitely still the case here. And Abel was really good towards the back half of these games. What really impressed me when it came to Abel in this particular series was his laning aggressiveness. On the Xayah into Draven, they were able to generate a pretty strong early lead in the 2v2. That just should not happen in that matchup. And then he was also able to generate a lead on the Aphelios. Now, this was a little bit more expected into the Zeri, who just doesn't play into Aphelios all that well, in my opinion. But you still have to give the credit where it's due. Abel still had to go out and perform against a bot lane that really has been the strength of Invictus Gaming over the course of the year so far. To see Abel come out and really be the player that I think is dominating the most and is the most actively successful, that's a really good sign. PP God obviously helps him a lot. The Xayah Rakan is a really strong lane. PP God's always been good at champions like Rakan, but being able to pull out the Annie, being able to be really strong in lane in that game number 2, also incredibly influential towards that win. And then topside was good too. I mean, Shanji was really important in game number 1 in particular on this Rumble. Without that Rumble, I actually think this comp is really counterable. You don't really have a lot of damage coming out on the side of OMG early on in the game. The Zaya's not really going to be offering that much. Yone won't be offering that much until he gets actually items. And so Rumble getting ahead in this game was actually super important towards their chances. He goes into You Should Know Me, who at the beginning of the year was looking like an absolute superstar. We'll get into him, but he really has not looked good in the past few weeks, and this series was definitely an encapsulation of that. But Shanji just looking so much better in the top lane. I would argue that Shanji's been this team's best and most consistent player over the course of the last year or so, and he proved that again here. The Rumble, obviously his signature pick, he was basically unstoppable with that in 2022, but he pulls out the Darius here as well, obviously something that we've seen globally in a couple of other regions, most notably the LEC, but can really work in the right scenarios. Is a really good early game bruiser that can punish picks like the Fiora. So overall, I would just say OMG looked really, really solid in this series. Not a lot of negatives to give them. This was one of their cleanest series of the year by far. And then for Invictus on the other side, definitely not how you wanted to end this week. You're now sitting at 500 after starting the season, I think like 4-1. Not exactly the last couple of weeks that you wanted to have. But you have been facing really tough competition. It's not like a lot of these are upsets. Losing to OMG, like they are a genuinely good team. You've lost to basically every other really good team. And so it's hard to sit here and be like, well, this team sucks, right? Because It just feels like maybe they're going through a tough run of form right now against a really tough schedule. And that can happen. Hopefully they can rebound. You Should Know Me is going to get my dud of the series here. He just has not been the same ever since this losing streak started. He was super aggressive, willing to invade, willing to take trades all year long, and he's still kind of willing to do that, but oftentimes he's doing it at the complete wrong times. Now it feels like whatever game sense he had, whatever macro idea that he had for being able to play at the right time, you know, that really pushed him forward at the beginning of the year, it's just kind of fallen off. It's not necessarily just this idea of sometimes the plays work and sometimes the plays don't. It just feels like he's making different plays now. Like watching him early in the season, it was like, wow, he's making really smart trades. He knows exactly when he can 1v1, when he can 1v2 at times, and, you know, when his champion power spikes are. Now it just feels like he's throwing himself at the enemy team. I'm not sure if it's desperation. I'm not sure if the losing streak has affected him mentally, but something is going on right now. He's not the same player that he was at the beginning of the year, and that's definitely disappointing. Gideon has been really awful over the course of this loss streak. He's really just not been able to keep up with basically any jungler in the LPL over the course of the last few weeks. And he was such an integral member to this Invictus Gaming team when they started the year. If he's not going to be able to step up, if he's legitimately going to look like a bottom 3 or 4 jungler like he has over the past few weeks, this team's probably not going to get back on the right track, which is super unfortunate. I still think On and Wink can be good. They've just faced some really good bot lanes, and this team honestly isn't prioritizing them in the same way that they were early on in the season. You Should Know He's getting a lot of the resources, which I do understand because he is kind of the aggressive focal point player, but On and Wink, if they're going to do that, they need to step up and win these 2v2s a lot more consistently. Dove has never really been the carry of this team. He's probably been the weakest member of this team all year long, and he continues to be on more supportive duty, even with the Galio in Game 2, and so it's not really on him. It's on a lot of these other players. You Should Know Me, On, and Wink have to step up, and Gideon in particular simply just has to be better, or else this IG team is not going to be in a good spot. For OMG, though, on the other side, they're solid. I mean, it's hard to get a grasp on this team because it feels like every single week they win a game and they lose a game, or they win a series and they lose a series, right? And it's like, you beat Invictus, which is solid. You beat a team around you. Last week you beat ThunderTalk. That's a really good win, and it proves to me that this team does have the talent to be into the top 10, but then you go and lose to Ultra Prime like you did this week, or last week you lost to Rare Atom, and it's like, I need you to be more consistent. If you're able to win all of these series, I'd feel so good about putting you a lot closer to top 6, top 7 in the LPL right now, but just with the way that you're playing, it's really hard to get any level of consistency and any level of idea where this team sits at. I think at their best, they're really solid. They're a team that can genuinely compete for top 7-ish in the region, but I just don't know if the consistency is going to be there. The variance, the up and down that they're going to be able to give you between games is just a little bit too much for me. We'll see where they end up landing in the power rankings, but at least they were able to get a solid win here. That's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in Week 6 of LPL. And it was a good one. It was we had a lower tier team to start the day, a lower tier matchup, a mid tier matchup in the middle, and then now we get a top tier matchup to close us out. We had Weibo Gaming taking on LNG Esports. And LNG picks up a huge win here to go 8-1 through their first 9 series of the year. That is a hell of a record and something that definitely should be commended, but you just have to also acknowledge that Weibo is indeed born to win trade. This is just the fate of this team. Some series they're going to show up and they're going to be dominant no matter who they're playing against, and some series they're going to show up and they're not going to be able to win no matter who they're playing against. And so that's just the truth of it. Shout out to LNG. They were able to get the better of them in this series. Let's talk about what they did well before we talk about what Weibo did poorly. For LNG, they are just streaking. It feels like everybody on this team continuously gets better over the season, which is scary because this jungle mid duo has already been the best jungle mid duo in the entire league, and it feels like they keep ramping up. They keep getting better. Tarzan and Scout are just playing at such a ridiculous level right now. A world-class level, if you will. Scout's going to get yet another player of the series. I feel like he's gotten so many of these on my channel over the years so far. He's got to be in the lead for MVP right now in terms of how he has played this season. He has been unbelievable in 2023. Even I couldn't have predicted Scout coming into LNG and being as immediately great as he has been over the course of this year, but he's been able to come in and he's been able to play a bunch of different styles of the game. He's been able to play super aggressive on some of these more assassin-oriented picks, or even some of the shove and roamers that he got much better at as the year went on last year. He's been able to play the Jace at a high level, which obviously not everybody in the world can do. He's been able to play mages at a high level, which we already knew he could do, but it's still good to see it. It just doesn't matter. He's been able to play everything at a ridiculous high level. Early game, mid game, late game, it doesn't matter. He's just crushing it right now, and he is honestly looking the best that he has maybe ever looked in the LPL, which is a huge sign for the LNG team that really wants to push for a title this season. Really like what they've been able to do. It's hard to keep praising Scout because it feels like I've already talked about him so much, but I mean, the dude is just good. What else do you want me to say? I want to give a lot of credit to Tarzan. I know a lot of it's going to go to Scout, but Tarzan has maybe been the best jungler in the LPL this split. He's been that supportive style jungler. That's what he does best. I know a lot of people think about Tarzan and they think about like, oh, he must be able to carry games, right? Because he's the best jungler in the world. Not necessarily, right? He is a supportive style jungler. I compare him a lot to Peanut as a player in terms of at his best, at his comfort level, what is he great at? And it's making sure that his mid, his bot, his top are in positions to win the game. He wins early games so efficiently, even on these champions, that it makes facilitating a lot of the plays that he ends up wanting to make even easier. These two are unstoppable when playing at their top level. They have proven that at this point, and it is super duper fun to watch. The other player that you have to shout out on the side of LNG is LP. He has made major strides to get better throughout the split so far. I was very concerned about him, obviously, leading into the year, but even the first couple series of the year that they were winning, he was taking a major backseat role, very much weak side, was losing lane, and didn't really matter all that much that he was losing lane because the rest of the team was going to be able to make up for it. Zika was having some good performances, and Tarzan and Scout were obviously popping off, but as we've gone further along into the season, this bot lane has honestly just gotten way better at winning these straight 2v2s in the bottom lane, which is super integral to LNG's success at the top of the standings. Yes, you can probably get away with Tarzan and Scout just being better than everybody when you're facing some worse competition like they did earlier in the year, but when you go up against a team like Weibo, when you eventually go up against JDG and Top Esports and Edward Gaming, you're going to need this bot lane to step up, and LP, I do think, has shown a good amount of development. Obviously, Hang has helped with that a lot. I think Hang's had a really good split so far, and Zika's been solid on the top side. All he needs to be is not a problem, and that really is what he has been. He's obviously an aggressive top laner, someone who is going to look to trade, but not someone who's going to throw the game away. He's not the shy, right? He's not, you should know me when he's playing bad. Like, he's a good player. He's someone who is going to be good enough for you to be able to win with. And that's the case with LNG. You've got your superstars. You've got Tarzan and Scout. You've got good role players in Zika, LP, and Hang. You can be a top team. This is a team that genuinely could be someone that contends for the top of the standings. Now, obviously, we'll get into it. Their schedule has yet to heat up. Their next 3 series are going to be the 3 hardest of the year, and that's really going to test them. But when you're talking about a good start, beating Weibo is a pretty good start. On the flip side, Weibo, not very good here. This is a very standard Weibo loss in 2023. This is how they have lost basically every series, which is bot lane plays solid. Light doesn't necessarily generate a huge lead, but he's certainly not behind either. He pulls out the Vayne in game 2, which is just not good. I don't really know what the thought process is behind this. I know that Light, reportedly likes to play Vayne a lot in scrims and in solo queue into Ziggs, but I still don't think this is very good on the stage, and we kind of saw that, but it was really the top side that was the problem, again, for Weibo. When this team loses, it's probably the top side's fault. It's just kind of the case with this team. Xiaohu is going to get my dud of the series. He really hasn't been all that dominant this year. It's really been Karsa, who I think has been kind of carrying a lot of their wins, and then Light and Crisp, I think, have been really consistent over the course of the season so far as well, but Xiaohu has honestly taken a little bit of a step back, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of this. We always know that Xiaohu can turn it on when it matters, right? He's been very good in LPL playoffs before. I imagine that he could absolutely do that again here, but the start of the season hasn't exactly been great. I think the mid lane talent in the LPL has definitely grown a lot in the past few months, and I think Xiaohu might be struggling to keep up with that. I'm not saying that he's going to be a problem for Weibo, but it's not exactly the big powwow start to the year that I think a lot of people were hoping from spring Xiaohu. But other players on the team, I think Karsa just got out jungled by Tarzan. It happens, especially on Elise. Sometimes if you're not able to get the early game advantage, you just get out jungled. That's going to happen. And then the Shy wasn't particularly great in the top lane on the Cassante. Zika was honestly just the better top laner in this series. But overall for Weibo, it's always just going to be about the consistency. I praised them earlier in the week because I'm like, wow, they came out and dominated a bad team. Like, that's something Weibo doesn't typically do, and I want to see them do that more. But then they come back here against a good team at LNG, and they just don't look like they're on the same page. I don't really know where to put this Weibo team at this point. They are so off and on and off and on that it's hard to rank them because when they're on, they are a top 2 team in the league. When they're off, they're barely a playoff team, and that really is the case. And so it's really hard to power rank a team like Weibo, but we do kind of at least know what they are at this point. And then for LNG, this team could be very good. Their real test is going to start next week when you start facing off against the top teams in the league back to back to back. If they can pick up a couple of wins in that stretch, that will really prove that this team deserves to be in the top, like, 2 or 3 teams in the LPL. Right now, what they've proven is that they definitely deserve to at least be in the upper echelons, and I don't think that's really all that disputable anymore. Alright, that is going to do it for my LPL Week 6 overview and analysis of all 6 days of action. Up on your screen now, you're going to see the updated LPL standings after 6 weeks of action. Of course, in the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. So let's go over the biggest risers, biggest fallers. Biggest riser this week, kind of shocking some people, I think is going to be WE jumping up from number 13 to number 11. They just looked really good in their wins this week, and honestly, their series against Rare Adam filled me with a lot of confidence to put them right back on that 11 spot where they were a couple of weeks ago, right outside the top 10. I think, you know, that 7, even really like 8 to 13 range is super close right now in terms of the viability of a lot of those teams, but WE did take a little bit of a leap up in terms of where I view them this week. Of course, that means Rare Adam drops down, NIP drops down. Other risers this week, notably, Top Esports, EDG, and LNG all jumping up 1 spot because Weibo's going to fall to number 5. I just can't trust this team in the top 4 right now. There are too many good teams in the LPL for me to consistently put Weibo into the top, 2 like they were over the past few weeks, but truthfully, this team can beat anyone. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that if Weibo was in the playoffs right now that they would finish 5th, because they could win the title, legitimately. I can't trust them right now in the regular season to put them any higher than 5th. RNG is going to leapfrog BLG, jump up to number 6 because they had a good week. BLG falls to number 7. And then IG is going to drop down to number 10 here. Just barely hanging on to that playoff spot as of right now. OMG and ThunderTalk are both going to leapfrog them. I think both of them have been much more consistent over the past few weeks. If IG continues to struggle, they're on a big loss streak right now. If they continue to have these problems, they're going to fall out of the playoffs because teams like WE and Rare Adam are definitely hot on their tail. But other fallers and risers, FPX dropping down to number 16. They are a bottom 2 team in the league. It's hard to look at them as anything else at this point. And that means Ultra Prime and LGD leapfrogging them to go up to 14 and 15. So those are my power ranking changes this week. But let's go ahead and talk about my player of the week and my dud of the week. My player of the week here in Week 6 is actually the same player of the week as it was in Week 5. It's Scout on LNG, who just continues to be an MVP candidate and just continues to dominate the LPL right now. He's playing at an all-time level, and I, for one, am really here for it. Hopefully he can keep it up because LNG is so much fun to watch. But it's going to be a real tough run of form for them over the next few weeks. The other candidate I would say was Ming on RNG, who was really good this week. Even Gala could probably be in the conversation, but it's going to go to Scout for me for player of the week in Week 6. And then my dud of the week in Week 6, this was actually kind of tough. I don't think anybody was particularly awful throughout a major stretch of the week, but I am going to go ahead and give it to Wink on Invictus Gaming. I think Wink was the weakest member overall across both series for IG. I think you could very realistically give this to You Should Know Me. I think you could very realistically give this to anybody on FunPlus Phoenix, but for me, Wink is going to be getting my dud of the week here in Week 6. That bot lane simply has to step up for IG to break this losing streak. So, Wink is my dud of the week for Week 6, and Scout is my player of the week for Week 6. But that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. Of course, let me know where you guys disagree with my power rankings. We're not going to have the same exact power rankings, so I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions down below. Who was your player of the week? Who was your dud of the week? You know I love having those conversations with you guys, so leave them down there. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot for the channel. Of course, these videos take a long time to make and produce, and so if you are enjoying them, hit that like button. It really does help get that channel out to more people, and it shows me that you guys are enjoying the content. And of course, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. Not only do we do LPL content, we do all 4 major regions and the NACL every single week. You're going to enjoy the content if you enjoyed this one. I promise you that. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.